It is always described the same way: a black ambulance. No markings, no siren number, no visible license plate, just a long, matte black body that seems to absorb light instead of reflecting it. People say you don't hear it coming. You notice it only when it is already beside you, and by the time you realize what you're looking at, it is already too late. The legend of the haunted black ambulance exists in dozens of countries under different names, but the details are disturbingly consistent. A medical vehicle that appears in moments of crisis. A paramedic crew that never speaks more than a few words. A ride that promises help and delivers something else entirely. Some claim it takes the dying. Others say it creates the dead. And a few insist the ambulance is not supernatural at all, but something far worse. A hidden system, operating in the shadows of real emergency services, cleaning up things that were never meant to be found. The first written record of a black ambulance does not come from folklore. It comes from a police incident report. In 1974, in the outskirts of Manchester, a night patrol officer named Thomas Greaves responded to a call about an unconscious man found near a bus stop just after midnight. By the time Greaves arrived, the man was already being loaded into an ambulance. This alone was not unusual, except the vehicle was entirely black, with no visible NHS markings, no reflective stripes, and no active emergency lights. Greaves later testified that he attempted to approach the paramedic loading the stretcher, asking which service they were with. According to his statement, the paramedic looked at him for several seconds without speaking, then replied with a sentence Greaves would never forget. He said, "We're taking him where he needs to go." The ambulance doors closed. The vehicle pulled away without activating sirens. When Greaves radioed dispatch to confirm the pickup, he was told no ambulance units had been sent to that location. The unconscious man was never identified, and no black ambulance was ever logged at the time. The incident was dismissed as a paperwork error. But over the following months, similar reports began to surface, not just in Manchester, but across northern England. Always at night, always involving unconscious or injured individuals. Always the same description. A black ambulance, no markings, no audible siren, and a crew that seemed wrong. Witnesses struggled to explain what they meant by that word. Wrong. Some said the paramedics moved too smoothly, as if rehearsed. Others said their faces appeared expressionless, almost mannequin-like. One woman claimed the eyes of a paramedic reflected no light at all, as if they were glass. The most disturbing reports came from those who interacted with the vehicle and lived to tell about it. In 1981, a factory worker named Alan Brewer collapsed during a late shift in Sheffield. Co-workers called emergency services, but before an official ambulance arrived, a black one pulled up outside the factory gates. 2 paramedics entered the building without asking for directions, as if they already knew exactly where Brewer was. They loaded him onto a stretcher and began to wheel him out. Brewer regained consciousness briefly during the transfer. He later described hearing one of the paramedics say, "He's not ready yet." The other replied, "He will be." Before Brewer could protest, his supervisor intervened, demanding identification from the crew. According to multiple witnesses, the paramedics froze. Not in fear, but in irritation. One of them slowly turned and stared at the supervisor, then quietly said, "This is not your concern." At that moment, the official NHS ambulance arrived. The black ambulance crew did not argue. They simply stepped back, released the stretcher, and walked out of the building. By the time anyone reached the door to follow them, the vehicle was gone. Brewer survived, but after that night, his health deteriorated rapidly. Doctors could not explain the sudden organ failures, the recurring nightmares, or the strange burn-like marks that appeared on his wrists. Marks shaped like hands. He died 3 years later. Stories like this spread quietly at first, passed between hospital staff, night shift workers, and police officers who had learned not to file certain reports. Many refused to talk publicly, fearing ridicule or disciplinary action. But then came the disappearances in 1993. During a heat wave in southern Italy, multiple elderly residents were reported missing after being seen loaded into what witnesses described as a dark emergency vehicle. Families were told their relatives had been transferred between hospitals, but no records existed of such transfers. The hospitals denied receiving them. Every missing person had one thing in common. They had not been terminally ill. They were stable, and they were alone when the ambulance arrived. Rumors began to circulate among emergency responders. Whispers of a phantom ambulance that only appeared when death was nearby, or when someone was standing at a crossroads between life and something else. Some paramedics claimed the vehicle followed them at a distance, matching their routes without lights, always just outside the edge of visibility. Others reported seeing it parked near morgues, abandoned roads, or outside closed hospitals in the early hours of the morning. Never during the day. Always when the world was quiet in Mexico City, the legend took on a more violent form. By the early 2000s, locals spoke openly of La Ambulancia Negra, a vehicle accused of harvesting organs from the living. Taxi drivers refused to stop for injured pedestrians at night, fearing the black ambulance would arrive before official help, and that stopping might mark them as witnesses in one case. A street vendor named Marisol Rojas claimed she saw the doors of the ambulance open briefly as it passed under a streetlight. Inside, she said, there were no stretchers, only hooks. Authorities dismissed the claim as hysteria fueled by crime-related fear, but internal hospital audits revealed unexplained organ shortages, falsified death certificates, and emergency transport logs that did not correspond to any registered vehicles. Files disappeared. Witnesses recanted, and the black ambulance continued to appear. Not every encounter ended in death. Some ended in something worse. A former U.S. Army medic, speaking anonymously in a 2010 online forum, described encountering a black ambulance near a closed military installation in Nevada. According to his post, the vehicle bore no military insignia, yet operated freely inside restricted zones. He wrote that he was ordered to assist with a transfer involving a restrained patient who appeared conscious but unresponsive. When he asked where the patient was being taken, one of the crew members replied with a phrase that mirrored reports from decades earlier. "Where he belongs." The medic later claimed he discovered that no such patient existed in any database. When he pushed the issue, he was reassigned within days and warned never to speak of the incident again. He ended his post with a single sentence. "It wasn't an ambulance. It was a collection unit." Skeptics argue that these stories are the product of urban legend, mass hysteria, or misidentified private medical vehicles. They point out that unmarked ambulances do exist, used by private contractors and government agencies. But that explanation fails to account for the consistency. The same phrases, the same behavior, the same absence of records, and the same aftermath. Those taken by the black ambulance are never found. Those who escape it are never the same. Perhaps the most chilling account comes from a nurse named Evelyn Hart, who worked night shifts in London for over 20 years. Shortly before her retirement, she agreed to be interviewed, on the condition that her recording would not be released until after her death. She described a night in 2006 when a patient coded unexpectedly. As staff prepared for emergency intervention, a black ambulance pulled up outside the emergency entrance. Unrequested, unannounced .2 paramedics entered the ward without hesitation. Evelyn said she felt an overwhelming pressure in her chest the moment they arrived, as if the air itself had become heavier. One of the paramedics approached the patient's bed and placed a hand on the man's shoulder. The heart monitor flatlined. Doctors rushed in, pushing the paramedic aside, but it was too late as the team worked to revive the patient. Evelyn turned back toward the doorway. The paramedics were gone, so was the ambulance. No security footage showed their arrival. But one camera captured something else, a single frame, later deleted, in which a black vehicle could be seen reflected in the glass of the emergency room doors. Waiting. Evelyn ended her interview with a warning. "Ambulances are supposed to save you," she said. "If you ever see one that doesn't want to be seen, don't let it take you." Because according to the legend, the haunted black ambulance does not chase.it, does not hunt.it, simply arrives when the decision has already been made. And in the silence that follows, it leaves behind no proof, only absence. The question everyone eventually asks is the wrong one. People ask what the black ambulance is. They should be asking when it began. Because the deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became that the haunted black ambulance did not emerge from superstition or modern paranoia. Its roots stretch back into a period when emergency medicine itself was still finding its shape, a time when the line between rescue and removal was dangerously thin. Long before sirens, paramedic licenses, and standardized medical response systems, there existed another category of transport. Vehicles tasked not with saving lives, but with managing death. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many cities operated what were unofficially known as death wagons. These were not hearses. They were rapid response carts dispatched during epidemics, industrial accidents, and urban disasters. Their role was simple: remove the dying before panic spread. In several European cities, archival photographs show these wagons painted dark colors, black, deep blue, or dark green, to conceal stains and discourage attention. They often bore no markings, moved without bells, and operated almost exclusively at night. Their crews were not doctors. They were collectors. During the 1918 influenza pandemic, similar vehicles appeared across the United States. Witness accounts describe black motorized vans arriving ahead of official health workers, collecting bodies, and sometimes people who were still breathing, and transporting them to undisclosed locations. Records from that period are incomplete. Entire transport logs vanished. Mass graves were sealed without documentation, and when families asked questions, they were told the same thing again and again. They were taken where they needed to go. It is here that the modern legend begins to sharpen. Because after the pandemic ended, those vehicles did not disappear. They adapted. During World War II, black ambulances were documented operating near bomb cities, prisoner camps, and classified research facilities. Unlike Red Cross vehicles, they carried no emblems. Unlike military transports, they were not listed in convoys. Yet witnesses described them clearly: always black, always quiet, always untraceable. In post-war Europe, as intelligence agencies expanded and governments buried secrets under layers of bureaucracy, a new theory emerged among historians who studied missing person cases that defied conventional explanation. They noticed patterns: victims who vanished after minor accidents, patients who were transferred but never arrived, individuals officially declared dead without bodies. In each case, emergency transport was involved, but the vehicle itself could not be identified. One declassified document from the early Cold War era refers obliquely to a non-attribution medical logistics unit tasked with containment, removal, and discretionary termination. The document does not specify what was being contained or who. Some researchers believe the black ambulance evolved into something far more specialized during this time. No longer a crude death wagon, but a mobile unit operating under exceptional authority, above local law enforcement, beyond hospital oversight. A system designed not to save everyone, only the necessary ones. This theory gained traction after a series of testimonies from former emergency workers surfaced online in the early 2000s. Many were anonymous. Some were deleted within hours. Others remain archived, buried in forgotten forums and obscure message boards. One former dispatcher described receiving calls that were never logged, routed through a separate line that did not appear on official schematics. When these calls came in, a response was dispatched immediately, but not to any registered unit. The screen would flash for a second, she wrote. Then it would go blank. And 5 minutes later, we'd get a confirmation ping with no vehicle ID. Another paramedic claimed he once followed a black ambulance out of curiosity after seeing it parked near a crash site. He said it led him through side streets, industrial zones, and finally into a tunnel that did not appear on any map he owned. When he emerged on the other side, the ambulance was gone, so was the tunnel. Perhaps the most unsettling accounts come from those who say they were inside the vehicle. These testimonies are rare, and fragmented survivors describe the interior as wrong in ways that are difficult to articulate. The space feels larger than the vehicle should allow. The walls absorb sound. Time behaves inconsistently. One man recalled counting his breaths to stay calm, only to realize hours had passed when he believed mere minutes had gone by. Another claimed the windows showed places that did not match their route. Long corridors of light, empty hospital wards that stretched endlessly, roads that curved into darkness without destination. NO1 describes medical equipment as we know it. There are no 4 poles, NO heart monitors, NO oxygen masks. Instead, they describe restraints disguised as safety straps, instruments hidden behind panels, and seats positioned not for comfort, but for control, and the crew. Always the crew. They do not behave like medics. They do not reassure. They do not explain. They ask questions that sound less like triage and more like evaluation. Do you remember where you were before the accident? Are you alone? Do you feel finished? One survivor reported being asked a question that still haunts him decades later. If we stop, will anyone notice? These encounters share another disturbing detail. The ambulance never rushes. Even when lives are supposedly at risk, the vehicle moves with deliberate calm. No sirens, no urgency. As if the outcome has already been decided. As if speed is irrelevant. This aligns with a darker interpretation of the legend that the haunted black ambulance does not respond to emergencies at all. It responds to thresholds. Moments when a person is vulnerable, isolated, or in transition. Moments when their disappearance would be explained away by chaos, confusion, or bureaucracy. Accidents, disasters, night shifts, remote roads. The ambulance does not create these moments. It waits for them. In 2014, an independent journalist investigating medical corruption in Eastern Europe uncovered a pattern that reignited global interest in the legend. Several private hospitals had contracts with unlisted transport services responsible for special patient transfers. These services operated under shell companies that dissolved and reformed every few years. The vehicles were described as black. The staff were listed as contractors. The destinations were redacted. When the journalist attempted to photograph one of these ambulances, his camera malfunctioned. When he tried again with a different device, the image appeared, but the vehicle was missing from the frame. Only the reflection remained. A black shape warped in glass. Shortly after publishing his findings, the journalist disappeared while traveling between cities. His hotel room was found untouched. His phone was powered on, but all recordings from the previous week were erased. Authorities ruled it a voluntary disappearance. Those who knew him disagreed. As the digital age expanded, so did sightings. Dashcam footage showing a black ambulance appearing briefly, then vanishing between frames. Security cameras capturing shadows where vehicles should be. Emergency radio chatter containing unexplained acknowledgments. And then there are the voices. Audio recordings circulated among paranormal researchers, allegedly captured during encounters with the black ambulance. The audio is always degraded, distorted, as if the sound itself resists being preserved. In one recording, a man can be heard pleading, asking where he is being taken. A calm voice replies, barely audible. Forward, not to a hospital, not to a morgue, just forward. What makes the legend truly unsettling is not that the haunted black ambulance might be supernatural. It is that it might be bureaucratic, that it represents a hidden layer of reality where people are quietly removed, not because they are evil or chosen or cursed, but because they are inconvenient, unaccounted for, unmissed. When emergency workers talk privately, they sometimes refer to a phenomenon known as clean scenes, accidents where everything is too neat, No blood where there should be blood. No debris where there should be chaos. And no victims. Just witnesses who are told help arrived. Even though no one saw it. Even though no records exist. Even though the ambulance was black. If the haunted black ambulance is real, then its greatest power is not fear. It is plausibility. It operates in the spaces we do not question. The margins of paperwork. The blind spots of memory. The moments when we assume someone else is keeping track. And once it takes you, there is no investigation. Because, officially, you were already gone. If the black ambulance is real, then the most terrifying question is not where it comes from. It is how it chooses. Because across decades of reports, one pattern emerges with disturbing clarity. The vehicle does not take at random. It does not simply appear near death. It appears near specific kinds of people in specific circumstances, at specific moments when resistance is unlikely and questions will never be fully asked. Survivors, witnesses, and former medical workers all describe the same invisible filter at work. The people taken are rarely famous, rarely powerful, rarely the kind whose absence would trigger headlines or investigations. They are the elderly living alone, the injured migrant worker, the night shift employee without close family, the homeless man struck by a car, the patient whose paperwork is incomplete, the traveler whose records are scattered across borders, people who exist in systems, but not at the center of them. A retired hospital administrator from France once described it bluntly in a private interview. "Medicine has blind spots," he said, "and something lives inside those blind spots. One of the most consistent indicators is timing. The black ambulance almost never appears when multiple official units are already present. It does not compete. It does not rush in. It arrives first or it arrives last when attention has faded and supervision is thin. Late nights, early mornings, shift changes, moments of confusion, moments when responsibility is diluted. In one case from 1998, a commuter train derailment in Eastern Europe left dozens injured. Emergency response was chaotic, overwhelmed. Witnesses reported seeing a black ambulance parked just beyond the perimeter lights, not assisting, not interfering. Waiting. A local volunteer medic later claimed that 3 injured passengers were placed into that vehicle after being tagged for transport. When official ambulances finally reached the area, those names were missing from the casualty list. Authorities said it was a clerical error, and no bodies were ever recovered. Hospital archives sometimes tell a quieter story. Nurses and clerks have described patient files that seem to dissolve under scrutiny. Admissions that appear in one system but not another. Transfer forms signed by staff who deny being on duty. Discharge codes applied to patients who were never discharged. And always, the transport method is the same. Private emergency transfer. No vehicle ID. No destination listed. One former records officer admitted that she was instructed never to question these entries. When she did once ask a supervisor for clarification, she was told, "Those patients are already resolved. Resolved. Not treated. Not saved. Resolved. In rare cases where the black ambulance was physically stopped, the outcomes were deeply unsettling. In 2007, a police roadblock in a rural part of Germany halted an unmarked black ambulance traveling without lights. Officers reported that the vehicle's exterior matched no registered emergency transport in the country. When asked to open the rear compartment, the driver calmly refused. According to the police report, the officers felt an overwhelming sense of pressure and disorientation during the exchange. One officer later described forgetting entire minutes of the encounter. Backup was requested. Before it arrived, the ambulance was allowed to proceed. The reason given afterward was vague. Jurisdictional confusion, lack of probable cause, conflicting authority. No citation was issued. No follow-up occurred. That same night, a nearby hospital recorded the sudden death of a patient who had never been admitted. Another incident, this time in South America, ended differently. In 2012, during a protest that, turned violent. A black ambulance attempted to leave the area with several injured civilians on board. A group of demonstrators blocked its path, demanding to know where the injured were being taken. Phones were raised, cameras recording. For the first time, the black ambulance hesitated. Witnesses claimed the doors opened. What they saw was not gore, not violence, not even overt horror. It was absence. The interior was described as clean, sterile, and almost empty. No visible medical equipment, no identifiable patients. Despite the fact that people had just been loaded inside. One witness described the space as unfinished, like a room waiting to decide what it was meant to be. Moments later, police arrived and dispersed the crowd. Footage from multiple phones later showed corrupted files, missing frames, or audio without video. The ambulance was gone. The injured were never located. Those who talk about the black ambulance often struggle to describe its presence accurately. This is not just fear. There is something about the vehicle that resists being fixed in memory. People recall its shape, but not its details. They remember it was black, but not how black. They remember the crew, but not their faces. Some neurologists suggest that extreme stress can cause memory fragmentation. Others, more controversially, point to dissociation triggered by perceived authority. When something looks official, moves with confidence, and speaks with certainty, the human brain often stops questioning. And the black ambulance exploits this perfectly. It does not threaten. It does not rush. It assumes permission. There are reports from children who encountered the vehicle that are particularly disturbing. In several cases, children described the ambulance as quiet or sleepy. One child said it felt like a place where sounds go when they die. Another said the paramedics smelled like nothing. Not antiseptic, not blood. Nothing. A former child psychologist who studied these testimonies noted that children are often more sensitive to inconsistencies adults rationalize away. They don't say it's scary, she wrote. They say it's wrong. Perhaps the most chilling pattern emerges when looking at who isn't taken. People surrounded by witnesses. People whose absence would trigger immediate alarms. People whose lives are heavily documented. The black ambulance does not want attention. It wants plausibility. This has led some researchers to propose that the vehicle operates according to a kind of invisible checklist as the person isolated. Is the moment chaotic? Will questions be delayed? Will paperwork explain the loss? If the answers align, the ambulance arrives, and if they don't, it simply never appears, which raises an even darker possibility that some people who should have been taken weren't, because someone intervened, because someone insisted on documentation, because someone refused to look away. There are a handful of cases where survivors believe this is exactly what saved them. One woman, injured in a late-night highway accident in Canada, recalls being loaded onto a stretcher by a black ambulance crew. As the doors closed, she heard another driver shouting, filming, demanding names and badges. The ambulance doors reopened. The crew stepped back. Minutes later, a standard emergency vehicle arrived. She survived, and she remembers the last thing one of the paramedics said as they walked away. "Not today." Those words suggest something deeply unsettling. That the decision is not purely mechanical. That there is discretion, judgment, choice. Some believe the black ambulance is connected to black-budget medical research. Others believe it is a relic of wartime practices that never fully stopped. A few argue it is not human at all, that it represents a process rather than a group. A function. A cleanup mechanism for reality. What is certain is that wherever emergency medicine exists, the legend follows. Cities modernize, systems improve, technology advances, and still the black ambulance is reported, always just outside the official structure, always just beyond accountability, always where explanation fails. Perhaps the most frightening idea is this: if the haunted black ambulance is real, then it does not need to hide forever. It only needs to remain believable, because as long as people assume someone else is in charge, Someone else is responsible, someone else is keeping records. The black ambulance can keep doing what it has always done. Arriving quietly, taking what no one will fight for, and disappearing into the space between what we notice and what we ignore. Eventually, every investigation reaches a point where stories are no longer enough. Patterns become pressure, and pressure forces something to crack. In the case of the haunted black ambulance, that crack came not from folklore, but from people who claimed they had worked alongside it, or inside the system that allowed it to exist. These accounts are never clean. They are hesitant, fragmented, often contradictory. But they share one disturbing quality. None of them describe the black ambulance as rogue. They describe it as authorized. A former logistics coordinator for a private medical contractor in Eastern Europe once explained that emergency response systems contain layers that most staff never see. Beneath public services, beneath hospital networks, beneath insurance frameworks, there exist contingency pathways, exceptional transfers, non-attribution responses, situations where paperwork is deliberately incomplete by design. He described them as corridors, routes that bypass standard accountability because accountability itself is considered a liability. When something happens that shouldn't have happened, he said, you don't document it, you redirect it. According to him, the black ambulance was not a vehicle, but a designation, a classification applied to transports that were not meant to end in treatment. They were meant to end in resolution. Another account came from a man who claimed to be a former vehicle procurement specialist for a multinational manufacturer. He stated that over the years, his company had produced a small number of custom emergency vehicles that never entered public fleets. No serial numbers, no branding, no registration records tied to civilian databases. The requests, he said, always came through intermediaries, and the specifications were always unusual. Sound-dampened interiors, reinforced doors, interior layouts that prioritized restraint over care, materials designed to resist biological contamination, but also resist forensic analysis. When asked where these vehicles were delivered, he answered simply, not hospitals. One of the most unsettling elements of Part 4 comes from audio. Not recordings released publicly, but transcripts described by those who claim to have heard them. Several emergency dispatchers have independently reported receiving calls that did not originate from phones. These calls did not display caller ID, location, or routing data. They arrived already connected, as if the line had always been open. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and it never asked for permission. IT issued notifications. Transfer in progress. Scene secured. Subject accounted for. Dispatchers who attempted to interrupt were either ignored or abruptly disconnected. In follow-up checks, the incidents associated with these calls showed anomalies. Missing patients, altered timestamps, or response logs that rewrote themselves after submission. One dispatcher described printing a call log, only to find that the paper faded within minutes, as if the ink itself refused to stay. But the most chilling testimonies come from those who claim direct contact with the crew. These individuals consistently describe the paramedics not as malicious, but as detached, professional, almost bored. They do not speak unless spoken to. They do not react emotionally. They move with certainty, as if following a script written long ago. When questioned about patient outcomes, they provide answers that are technically correct and completely meaningless. He's stable, even when the patient is dead. She's going to rest now, even when no destination exists. This will be over soon, without specifying for whom. One former nurse recounted an encounter in which she asked a black ambulance medic where they trained. He paused, then replied, on outcomes, not medicine, outcomes. This distinction matters, because medicine seeks to preserve life, outcomes seek to finalize it. Some researchers believe the black ambulance represents the physical expression of a broader, unspoken philosophy within modern systems, that not every life can be saved, tracked, or justified, and that managing disappearance is sometimes easier than managing survival. During disasters, pandemics, wars, and economic collapse, societies quietly accept that some people fall through the cracks. The black ambulance does not create those cracks. It operates inside them. This reframes the legend entirely. What if the black ambulance is not supernatural? What if it is simply the embodiment of institutional indifference, given wheels and authority? A mechanism that removes people who are statistically expected to vanish anyway. People whose deaths would not destabilize the system. People whose survival would require resources, accountability, or explanations. I end this interpretation. The haunted aspect is not the vehicle. It is us. Our willingness to accept incomplete answers. Our habit of trusting uniforms. Our assumption that someone else is keeping track. One final testimony, recorded shortly before the speaker died, brings the story into terrifying focus. The speaker was a senior emergency planner who claimed to have attended closed-door meetings during which non-recoverable scenarios were discussed. In those meetings, he said, the black ambulance was referenced indirectly, not as a vehicle, as a solution. What happens, he asked rhetorically, when saving someone creates more problems than losing them? He never answered that question, but he left behind a note that it read, the ambulance isn't haunted, it's obedient, and that may be the most frightening possibility of all. Because if the haunted black ambulance is real, then it does not stalk the night like a predator. It waits patiently, for isolation, for confusion, for silence. It arrives when systems decide quietly, efficiently, that a person has crossed an invisible line from worth saving to acceptable loss. And when it leaves, there is no crime scene. No suspect. No mystery, just paperwork that looks complete. And a space where someone used to be. By the time most people hear about the haunted black ambulance, the damage is already done. Not because they are in danger, but because the idea has lodged itself, somewhere deeper than fear. Once you know the legend, you begin to notice the gaps, the moments that do not quite add up, the assumptions you make without realizing it. Because the final truth about the black ambulance is not hidden in archives or secret recordings. It is hidden in everyday acceptance. When a person disappears, the first question is rarely who took them. It is why didn't anyone notice sooner? And that question quietly absolves everyone. And several cities where black ambulance sightings were most frequent, sociologists later identified a strange phenomenon. Communities developed an unspoken expectation that certain people were temporary. The elderly neighbor you rarely saw, the migrant worker who slept near the industrial zone, the homeless woman who vanished after winter. When they disappeared, there was sadness but no urgency, loss without investigation, absence without disruption. The black ambulance thrives in those conditions, not because it causes them, but because it reflects them. One of the last credible witnesses to speak publicly was a retired emergency room doctor from Australia. In his final interview, he described an incident from the late 1990s when a patient was delivered to his hospital by an unmarked black ambulance during a night of extreme overcrowding. The patient was alive, barely. The crew handed over no paperwork and no verbal report. They simply placed the stretcher down and left. Security footage later showed the ambulance entering the bay, but never leaving. The footage ended mid-frame. The doctor said the patient died minutes later, before any identification could be made. No fingerprints were on file. No missing person matched the description. The body was eventually buried under an administrative designation used for unclaimed remains. Case closed. Years later, the doctor realized something that disturbed him more than the vehicle itself. No one broke a rule that night, he said. That's what scares me. The system worked exactly as designed. Which leads to the final, unavoidable question. If the haunted black ambulance exists, if even a fraction of these accounts are true, then how often does it actually appear? The answer is probably less than you think, and far more than anyone would admit, because the ambulance does not need to be everywhere. It only needs to appear occasionally. just often enough to handle what the system cannot, just often enough to become a rumor instead of a statistic, just often enough to remain deniable. There is a reason the vehicle is always described as black. Black absorbs light. Black hides detail. Black allows different people to project different meanings onto the same shape. To some, it is supernatural. To others, criminal. To a few, administrative. And to those who understand it best, the black ambulance is not a thing at all. It is a function. A quiet correction. A final edit. The last known report came from a suburban neighborhood early morning just before sunrise. A jogger found an injured man lying near a service road and called emergency services. While waiting, a black ambulance arrived. The jogger hesitated. He remembered the stories. He started filming. He asked questions. The crew paused. They looked at the phone. They looked at each other. Then they stepped back. They said nothing. They closed the doors. They left. Minutes later, an official ambulance arrived. The injured man survived. When asked later why he filmed, the jogger said something simple. I didn't want him to disappear. That may be the only defense that has ever worked. Attention. Witnesses. Insistence. The haunted black ambulance does not like light. It does not like names. It does not like records that cannot be altered. And it does not like people who refuse to assume everything is under control. Because the ambulance does not force its way into reality. It is invited. By silence. By exhaustion. By the belief that someone else is responsible. So if there is one lesson buried inside the legend, it is not about fear. It is about noticing, about asking questions when something feels wrong, about staying present when the easiest thing is to look away. Because according to those who believe the black ambulance is real, it only takes those who are already half gone, forgotten, uncounted, unnoticed. And the moment you are fully seen, the moment someone insists you matter, is often the moment it leaves, quietly, without sirens, without explanation. Just another dark shape fading into the edge of the road, waiting for the next time. No one is paying attention.